Good afternoon. It's afternoon. Yes. Afternoon, depending on your time zone. My name is Victoria Di Francesco Soto, and I have the privilege of serving as the Dean of the Clinton School of Public Service. And I want to welcome you all here today to today's Clinton Presidential Center Presents, The Future American City Now. And before we start, I want to recognize some very important guests who are part of ensuring that our beloved Little Rock is a city of the future and ensuring that future today. So in this table over here, we have Mr. Virgil Miller, Dr. Dean Campiris, Antoine Miller, Antoine Phillips, oh my gosh, Cappy Peck, Kathy Webb, Joan Adcock. Thank you guys. We've got the whole city here. City leadership. I also want to acknowledge my colleagues, Stephanie Street, the Executive Director of the Clinton Foundation, and Dr. Jay Barth, the Director of the Clinton Presidential Library. So this is the first of a planned series because it does take a village. And in terms of thinking about the future of our American cities, and in particular of Little Rock, we have brought together the Clinton Presidential Center, the Clinton School, and our partners up the road in Fayetteville, the Faye Jones School of Architecture and Design. All of these conversations focused on that intersection of design, of leadership, of sustainability. Today's conversation will be informative and stimulating with a diverse array of perspectives: the environment, civic engagement, economic sustainability. I'm biased because this is what we do at the Clinton School that I'm looking right over here, where we're training our future leaders to solve these problems through these diverse lenses. There isn't one way to plan for our future or for our cities. This path requires diverse perspectives from social stability, equity, energy efficiency, and the policies that will shape our cities and neighborhoods. We're all in this together. Now, please help me in welcoming our star-studded panel for today. We have Gia Biagi, who is the Principal of Urbanism and Civic Impact at Studio Gang. We have Maurice D. Cox, a former commissioner of the City of Chicago's Department of Planning and Development. Susan Jones, founder of the architecture firm atelierjones. Trinity Wagner, the executive director of the Mayor's Institute on City Design. And our moderator, my colleague, Peter B. Keith, dean and professor at the Faye Jones School of Architecture and Design at the University of Arkansas. Welcome.
Good afternoon. We are just post-meridian here. On behalf of the Faye Jones School of Architecture and Design, and I dare say the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, I too want to second Dean DeSoto's welcome and gratitude to everyone attending both here and online. As you've said, this is the first in what we plan to be a series of collaborative events, beginning with seminars, conferences, workshops, lectures, and so forth. Over the last year or so, in conversation with Dean DeSoto and her staff, we have understood here at the Faye Jones School a remarkable consonance in the cause of design and public service. And so there's more to come in that convergence as we move ahead. But this is the first of those signal events. It's true, I'm joined here on the stage by a remarkable cast of characters. And yes, while they all come from now significant metropolitan areas or larger cities, I'd like to, in a sense, to reintroduce them to you all in another context entirely. Because yes, we are here in Little Rock, the capital of the state, a state that is itself, in a sense, populated by more than 540 small towns. This is a state in which its heritage, and I would say its culture and its future, may well be rooted not just here in Arkansas, but across the state in its small towns and in its communities. And it is to the betterment of all those communities and all those small towns and this city and the growing cities across the state that, again, the Clinton School and the Fay Jones School are dedicating themselves. So if I could frame our conversation from the outset as not just about the future of the city, but the future of a town, the future of a community, the future of a neighborhood, right? The future of a street, then perhaps we'll begin by, in a way, rescaling our ears, or what we're hearing, and understanding the relevance of each of the four perspectives. The other perspective is to understand that each of our presenters is themselves relevant to the discussion of the small town. Gia Biagi, yes, at Studio Gang and in Chicago, is herself, we could say, a citizen of a small town in Western Massachusetts, of which her father was the mayor. So here is public service embedded in the family. Maurice Cox, for all of his accomplishments over many years, recently certainly in Chicago and Detroit, was himself the mayor of a small town, Charlottesville, Virginia, population 50,000 people. He knows exactly what those issues are at the neighborhood and town scale. Susan Jones, perhaps, yes, from Seattle, is from one of the most heavily forested states in the United States, coming from Bellingham as well. But given her emphasis on low carbon approaches to design and construction, her approach is absolutely relevant to this state, 57% forest, with a tremendous amount of the state's economy rooted in the state's forests. And last, but certainly but not least, it's coincidental that Trinity is sitting next to me, but why not? She is a graduate of the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville, Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design. But if that weren't enough credibility, she is a citizen of El Dorado, Arkansas, who was born and raised. So here too, let's reframe our expectations. We are here to talk about cities, towns, neighborhoods, streets, how to live our lives better together. That is, I think a laudable ambition. But in the cause of education, it's also important to understand that we're also not here, humbly not here, to provide definitive answers. If anything, education, and I certainly believe design education, is always about simply asking better and better questions in order to point us towards better and better futures together. So with that as a framework and a context, let's begin. We're going to go from my left all the way to the right, beginning with Gia Biagi. I'm going to pass the clicker on down to you, and we will begin. I think we can advance a couple slides, Gia, to get to your title frame. And there we go.
I feel like John Mellencamp, you know, I was born in a small town, and tell you the story of our life. So to me, when I thought about this coming here and talking about the future of the American city, I realized that I had a confession to make, which is, I don't know the future. I don't know the future of the next American city. But here's what I do know. I do know advice that I would give you as you think about how to move your cities forward. And that the future American city, it requires adaptive thinking. If we want the cities that we're going to talk about today with my colleagues, we need to think about them as a way where we can apply a different kind of thinking. So this is Chicago, which frankly is made up about 50 small towns with 50 different mayors, just like smaller cities are. And as an urban planner, you look at it and you think, oh, there are all these parts, right? There are systems, there's transportation, expressways, there are highways, there are parks and open space and buildings and all this stuff. It's all these pieces, right? It's like a puzzle when you're an urban planner. You're like, if I can just put it together in the right way, then we'll have that city we want. But we know that a city is not a puzzle. That on the left is a Rubik's Cube, and for the kids at home, that's a 1980s analog handheld toy. And that's what it looks like when it's solved, right? Whether you take it apart like my kids do and put it back together, that's solved. Whether you follow the instructions you can get off the internet, that's what it looks like. You do it in Tokyo, you do it in Texas, that is solved. But we know that that's just technical thinking. And when we think about cities and how to move them forward, we need to think in an adaptive way, because what all of our cities are facing, no matter how big, no matter how small, no matter how medium-sized, are adaptive challenges. This is climate, this is poverty, this is homelessness, this is violence. All of our cities face this, these big, fat, hairy ideas. And the question is, how do we take what each of us know how to do and put it in service of moving the needle on that important public policy question, whether you're a designer, whether you're a community activist, an urban planner, or just helping out your neighbor, we all have a role to play on these adaptive challenges. Now that is an adaptive challenge. And if you don't know what an adaptive challenge is, know that you lived through one, and it's called the COVID-19 pandemic, right? A giant, unbelievable thing that landed on all of us, and it doesn't come with rules. We have to figure it out. And yes, that is a coyote walking through downtown Chicago, which is not normal. And it's also the case that during that time, we had our homes became our offices, right? Our offices became empty, and downtowns became wilderness, right? All of these things are happening, and we had to figure out what are the set of rules that we follow to navigate through it together. So at the time, I was commissioner of Chicago's Department of Transportation. So that's all the surface stuff you can think of where Maurice and I were colleagues. So at 30,000 feet, when you're looking at your city from a transportation perspective, it is that kit of parts. And we have all of these technical rules that we follow, like how to actively titrate the optimal parking spaces and how to figure out the right street geometry. But in an adaptive challenge, when you get close to it, when you get at that scale of the neighborhood, of the block, and what people need, those rules have to fall away. You can't stick to that technical thinking at 30,000 feet. You need to have an adaptive mindset. And adaptations with streets, and we all saw it, streets, they became restaurants. Streets became health clinics. Streets became galleries. Streets became churches. We saw all of that. And what I learned in that moment is we have to allow ourselves to let those rules fall away. And it works not only during a pandemic, but in my experience working in parks and recreation, which I did for about 15 years. This is a park in our city, and on the north side of the park is where all the kids live, above the street, and below the street is where all the fun stuff is in the park, but the kids aren't coming to it, right? So 30,000 feet, right? That looks like a technical problem. It looks like the street, right? The street is the problem. But when you get close to it and you build relationships and you walk in with an adaptive mindset, you learn that it's not the street, that it's actually a gang line that you can't see that runs through the park. And without that adaptive mindset, you'll never get toward moving the needle on an important adaptive question like violence in a neighborhood. All right, I'm telling you this, but you don't have to take my word for it. Quantum theory tells you this, right? So I think the adage goes, anyone who thinks they understand quantum theory doesn't understand it, so don't worry about it. But what this graph is telling you is two things. In the black line, you have theory, and in the orange, you have practice. And this is Max Planck's constant, which is as you get further away from something, you see those two lines at the end where it's circled? That's being like 30,000 feet away from a problem. Your theory tracks with the results that you're seeing. It's a very technical mindset. But as you get closer to the problem, as the brightness of that wavelength becomes more intense, the theory starts to fall away. What's operating at that 1 foot level, at that neighborhood scale, at the smallest of units, something different is going on. And you have to walk in thinking in an adaptive way and allow those rules to fall away. We've seen this in cities like Chicago and other places. And this is a project where it's a retail corridor. It's a project that we worked on with the city of Chicago. And, you know, if you're looking at a zoning map, you'd say, well, that is a great parcel circled over there. That ought to be retail on a retail corridor that needs investment, right? Commissioner Planning would say that, but he didn't. He's a good partner in this. But what we recognized when we got close to the problem, right? The rules of zoning, they had to fall away. That what we understood when we got close to it is that the challenge that was happening on the ground was actually about violence prevention and having a safe place for kids to play. That we had to unlock ourselves from those rules and what we thought we knew, looking at it from a distance and up close, produce something entirely different, a roller rink on a commercial corridor that, yes, needs retail investment, but it needed this more now. And we all have the tools to think this way and put it in service of those questions. And we see it again in another city in New York that has this condition of step streets. I know what a street is. I know how it works. It's very technical. I know how a stair works. You up, you go down, it navigates those distance. But what we recognized as we moved closer to it, that it needed to be adaptive. It needed to work in service of communities that were trying to create, again, safe spaces, move the needle on a giant public policy question and make their neighborhood a better place for it. That adaptive thinking happens right here. It's not far from here. If you go to the American Museum of Fine Art, Arkansas, could be America. Yes, it is, yeah. The Arkansas Museum of Fine Arts, right? Look at that historic photograph on the left, and you see addition after addition after addition. That's looking at it from 30,000 feet and thinking, well, the technical challenge here is we need another addition because we need more space. But the adaptive route, the adaptive mind, looks at it differently and in an intentional way, that getting to that 1 foot level and really understanding that space, understanding what it needs to do, meant a much more organic negotiation of all of that architecture to produce something beautiful and vibrant and of this place. And so I would leave you with the notion that all of this way of thinking, that we come across it, we find it in the moment through our relationships and understanding things on the ground, but we can translate that into a more systemic way of thinking, that make it a reflex, that we understand the closer we get to something, we need to let those rules fall away. And so we require that adaptive thinking, and we require it to have a city that we all want, one that is more equitable, one that is decarbonized, and one that is joyous. And you'll hear from my colleagues about what that looks like. Thank you.
So this is on. I'm going to take your clue and stand up
Here you go.
and have my timer.
You have a lot.
Oh my God, I have a lot of things in my hand. Okay.
You can use this all to stand at the podium.
This is good.
Okay.
How about the podium?
I can time for you.
Okay. So we were also told that this was supposed to happen in 6 minutes and 40 seconds.
30.
So that's why we all have the timer. You did pretty well, Gia. So I'm going to start. Okay. Oh, excellent. Thank you. Oh, free. Okay. So the future of the American city must be equitable and equitable for all. And so I want to start with two cities that I've come to know well, Chicago and Detroit, and try to illustrate this. And I start by asserting that a city has a heart, and the heart of those cities are their downtowns. And you have to have a robust and vibrant heart of a city. This is the case in all of the cities I've seen, as has been the case with Little Rock. But there was a time when we applied planning principles that were the antithesis of city building. So here in Little Rock, some of you may remember the 9th Street corridor, the West 9th Street corridor, which was a vibrant African-American neighborhood, blocks, shops, people living above the shops. At the time, urban planners thought that all that should be erased to build Interstate 630. This is how they thought to revive the heart of the city, by demolishing a neighborhood. So I would argue that the heart of it, the soul of any city, resides in its neighborhoods. And if you lose your neighborhoods, you've lost your soul. So it is the ultimate irony that I have been called to work on the soul of cities again. And so I don't think it's an either or, I think it's both and. And it's about those basic building blocks of neighborhoods. It's about streets that accept an entire variety of mobility types. And an example from Detroit, where a typical neighborhood main street went from having 8-foot wide sidewalks to having 24-foot wide sidewalks. and is now the second most visited commercial corridor in the city because mobility was interpreted as bikes, pedestrians, and a vibrancy on the city streets. It's also about plazas. It's about spaces, everyday spaces that give people joy, allow them to linger and gather, like this example of a public open plaza that we inaugurated post-COVID. And this, in partnership with the Commissioner of Transportation, was an attempt to take over the street and reclaim it as a place for people to gather coming out of COVID. But it's also anticipating the potential future of urban development, as this example in Detroit, still surrounded by parking lots, anticipating the urban form that would happen as a result of creating a great place. It's also about parks, about creating those releases back to nature in an urban context. And sometimes it's, again, transforming a vacant lot into a respite with hundreds of trees, like this example in Core City in Detroit. Or the idea of a vacant series of lots in a low-income neighborhood, 27 random lots pulled together to create a 2-acre park at the heart of the Fitzgerald neighborhood. A place where, for the first time, this neighborhood could see the kind of social economic mixing of people in a safe place at the heart of a neighborhood. It's also about greenways. It's about the connective tissue between places that give people a sense of their connectivity. And this project, which is well underway, it's a 27-mile greenway loop connecting 27 neighborhoods for the first time. Many of them historically been disinvested in and not having access to this kind of amenity. So imagine having a 150-foot greenway passing right behind your backyards that take you down to the Detroit River. People couldn't wait to access this new greenway. But it's also about historic preservation, about preserving those buildings that are, again, testaments to the passage of time and adaptively reusing them. And I'm speaking of even the most modest buildings, like in the Fitzgerald neighborhood, where the first order before building any new housing was to renovate and rehab the existing housing that community had as a strategy, and to translate vacant lots into flowering meadow gardens. And it's about development, but development with character, and valuing these neighborhoods by pursuing an agenda of design excellence. And so a neighborhood adjacent to downtown in Detroit, which has the full array of housing options, all side by side. 30% of the homes here are affordable, sitting right next to market rate, right next to higher income housing. So entire neighborhoods can be built incrementally to feel like neighborhoods that were built once upon a time. But it's also about allowing history and the reuse of buildings to be juxtaposed to new construction, like this affordable housing mixed-use development in Austin, in Chicago. And it's about the incremental, gentle density that our neighborhoods can receive, such as this competition for the missing middle density in Chicago neighborhoods that go from a 2-flat to a 3-flat to a row house to a 6-flat, allowing new housing types to integrate and infill existing neighborhoods. And so it's also about preserving but enhancing existing neighborhoods through strategic infill. And so my notion that the future city, a more equitable city, it's about the streets, it's about the plazas, it's about greenways, it's about historic preservation, and it's about development with character. That's it. Thank you. Okay.
The podium. It looked much more comfortable than trying to balance all those things. Thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be here, y'all. Let's see. I'm going to talk about the decarbonized city, which is getting a little bit technical here, but so I apologize. And so I thought I would offset that by telling a little bit of a story. I'm Susan Jones, architect of atelierjones. I have a new vision for building cities, decarbonizing cities. This is the story of digging deep, of going into the dark, of asking what is our time for and how to keep focused on our time here at hand. How can what we design as architects be connected to what we live, where we live, from the urban to the ecological scale, from city streets to forests? Like the rhizomic communities of roots that spread throughout our forests, how can we decarbonize our 20th century cities to reflect instead 21st century values? And how can we make that impact meaningful at scale? Over a decade ago, deep in the last recession, I would venture late into the night again and again in my atelierjones model shop to build yet a little model for our family house. The models emerged into a house, and the house, a new type of design in a busy city neighborhood, became a story of how to reinvent and disrupt our 20th century building industry, how to build with lower carbon materials. The house became a study of ecology, how to reinvent relationships between design and our regenerative forests and their natural carbon storing wood, and how to reduce the impact of concrete and steel construction and decarbonize our cities. As we designed more with mass timber, from churches to modular schools, we kept learning. The tall, mute mass timber blanks became tectonic poetry in the falling light. And if I hadn't fallen in love with them before, with their prefabricated lower carbon footprint, I now fell in love with their subtle angles, designed with software and cut with giant CNC machines. This was not my journey alone. I reached out to universities, faculty, students, to mills and manufacturers, to rural communities with economies ruined by past Pacific North timber wars. I wrote a book that I shared around the world, from New York City to London, and had discussions with Tokyo firefighters. I moved out of my own silos and created allies and communities of experts in other fields. And the communities grew and the allies expanded. Legislatures from both sides of the aisle recognized the power of a material that could create housing for people in the midst of our divided cities, and tapping into that power and harnessing it for good to change our highly carbon-intensive construction industry to a lower carbon one, to transform fraught and anxious forestry wars into careful, thoughtful dialogue, into careful visions of the future. We were building low-carbon wooden cities built out of well-managed, sustainable, and thriving forests across this country. So the sharing continued. At the request of National American Institute of Architects, the voices of 90,000 architects needed to be represented at a table of firefighters, fire chiefs, concrete and steel lobbyists. I waded reluctantly into that technically uber-precise world of code officials and shared, pro bono, my time and intimate knowledge of mass timber, sitting in bad hotels and windowless conference rooms for 3 years to write thousands of lines of dull, administrative building code collaboratively. Scale was the vision. A house is a beautiful refuge. A church inspires, but tall timber buildings made of large, clunky, strong, cross-laminated timbers could have a real quantifiable impact on our cities' carbon footprints. We invented new typologies of tall buildings, and then to provide data-driven research, we had to test their life safety capacities by building them again and burning them down again and again and again, or at least trying to. But let me be clear, this was a war. The stress that appears in my face there, testing to hundreds of national building code and fire code officials, is no accident. We counted the votes, assembled voices across the country, against the well-organized forces of concrete and steel industry, the fire lobbyists and their sometime partners, earnest anti-forest lobbies that cannot sometimes see the forest for the trees. And then we won. Today, the code is law in multiple states and cities and available for all jurisdictions and project teams to use across the country as they will. Today, I am back in my office with my good colleagues, designing and building housing and office buildings with lower carbon superstructures in cities and regions, from California to New York City to Seattle, with the very codes I helped write. We are exploring new lower carbon ways to build and how to replicate and to make these a larger impact at scale. Mass timber lends itself to key urban challenges, like how to create enough housing in our cities and do so in a lower carbon way. Our Heartwood project, recently completed in Seattle, central Seattle, houses some 150 people for lower market rates than tech-rich Seattle is typically able to support. And this project can be easily replicated with our own Revit models at scale all across the US. Decarbonizing our cities also improves the experiences for the people who live, work, and visit these cities. Bringing nature back into the materiality of our cities allows a peaceful calm that prioritizes wellness and a coexistence with nature, even in the hearts of our city. Upstairs in Heartwood, the small workforce housing apartments perch high above street trees, and the light falls gently into small spaces as the sounds of buses and sirens fade in the distance. And the subtle smell of the forest envelops as the city is revealed, surrounded by soft, natural wood. atelierjones is now looking carefully at how to replicate the success of Heartwood to transform the carbon impact of buildings, and in our practice today, cities, communities, nonprofits, tribes, and tech companies are supporting this vision. With projects and research grants from New York City to Silicon Valley, to Capitol Hill, Seattle, and even to high in the Sierra Nevadas, in a community decimated by in a post-forest fire landscape in rural California, where we are helping the Mayadu tribe to rebuild their ancestral home on a fire-scarred site. By connecting our cities to our forests, by decarbonizing and disrupting our building as usual methodologies at scale, we are creating regenerative communities for our cities, for our forests, and for all the people who live in them. Thank you very much for listening to us.
All right. Here we go. Thank you to my esteemed panelists and colleagues here, and Peter and the Clinton Center for having us. The future American city is joyous for all. A joyous city is playful. A joyous city is restorative. A joyous city has beauty and wonder, and I think we can all agree that we could use a little bit more joy in our lives. And importantly, a joyous city, all residents feel that they can partake in these joys. It's inclusive. People feel they belong in public spaces. People feel their voices are heard and translated into action. People have space for well-being. And to me, this is a primary goal of city design, to build joyous, nourishing environments for our neighbors. So maybe back up just a little bit. Many people think of city design as the realm of architects and planners and real estate developers, but it's also where policy, economics, land use, mobility, infrastructure, and people come together to make a place. It's a way to put people first and improve their lives. And for today, I want to focus on one part of this: people feeling that their voices are heard and translated into action. And joyous cities don't happen by accident. Indeed, the default ways that we build our cities, centered around the movement of cars, is often at odds with human-scaled, joyous places. So how do we change how we build our cities? It starts with how we, city leaders, designers, engage our communities, our neighbors, our constituents, how we lead with design, how we listen to our residents as they detail their hopes and dreams and values for the future, what we might call community engagement. How we translate that vision into a vision and an action plan that might look like creating a plan or long-range planning, and how we put that plan into action and communicate back what we've done, how those hopes and dreams and values become brick and mortar and how they improve lives. And that last part, government is particularly bad at. And so, how many times have we had mayors come to us in the program that I run and say, we have all these plans and they sit on a shelf and we're tired of planning and we're ready for action. So we often have to remind mayors that plans don't have legs. They aren't sentient. They require someone who wakes up every day working to make them reality. So a very quick example here. About a year ago, the city of Boston set up what they call their Planning Advisory Council. And in essence, it's a small office that's inside city government that has the ability to convene department heads. So the heads of planning, the heads of transportation, parks, public works, arts and culture, housing, to coordinate and prioritize investments for realizing a green, growing, and family-friendly Boston. For the city to be able to demonstrate progress against the plans that they have and to tell how they're impacting lives. So this is not an action plan from Boston, but most every city plan has something like this in the back, an implementation plan. We've worked with over 1,200 mayors in the history of our program. So I went on the server, selected a plan at random, turned to the back and just clipped a page. But every plan has something like this, right? It details what we're gonna do, who's gonna do it, and when we're gonna do it. But the problem is, as we know, this often doesn't get done. But the work that Boston is doing goes well beyond an implementation plan that exists only on paper. The office is responsible for coordinating and helping to prioritize capital investments between departments to bring plans forward. This is something that's not standard practice in city government, where silos are pretty notorious. Help move plans forward when things get stuck in government, which we know happens often. And so, perhaps most importantly, the work they're doing, though, is telling the story back to the community in a way that is digestible and understandable of progress that's being made on plans that the community themselves helped create, how the city is really using that community vision as a North Star. And so through this website, the city's detailing progress that's being made on a specific plan. It's a plan for the neighborhood of Mattapan. This plan was finalized in 2023 after 5 years of community engagement. Now the city's implementing. We know this is often when cities go silent, moving into the parks and green space session here. So this is the format's an ArcGIS story map. It details elements in the plan, projects that are moving forward from the plan, and how the plan informed the work. This is on a website being continuously updated, but it's a great example of how we can communicate back to a community that as plans are being implemented. This may seem common sense to do so. My colleagues on the table know that this is not standard practice by any stretch, but cities could implement, and many cities could implement and benefit from such an approach. So, what does this have to do with joyous cities? In a time of incredible polarization, this trust, the trust that government will keep its word, is critical to well-being. It's critical to individual well-being and to the collective well-being of our democracy. And trust in government still exists at the local level. We joke in mayor world that there is no Democrat or Republican way to fill a pothole. To run for local office, you have to fundamentally believe in fundamentally believe that government can be a tool to improve people's lives. So the founder of the program that I run, the former mayor of Charleston, South Carolina, Mayor Joe Riley, he was mayor for 10 terms, served for 40 years, built a waterfront park during his time. And the city is well known for this now, but at the time it was really controversial. taking the most valuable land in the city and giving it to the public. At the time, couldn't even be reserved for private events. But Mayor Riley used to say that that we must give the best land in the city to the public. He would say that there are people in our cities and towns that only have the city, that they'll never see the Pacific Ocean or the beauty of Portsmouth. And if we're lazy about city building, that we're giving our neighbors and everyone else a less joyful and less nourishing environment for their lives. So, thank you.
Thank you, all four of you. What we have thought to do now is to have some discussion amongst our presenters and then go to certain questions, both from this audience and then there have some have also been provided to us online. I'd like to begin and put forward that in the first place, yes, you've heard today from four distinguished presenters with architectural training, architectural practice, with that as a focal point for their work. And yet, to the spirit of why we're gathered here, I've also wanted to make sure you understand these four people as public servants, and that this relationship between design and public service, in my view, is intrinsic to the identity of a designer. What are we doing in design if we are not focused on designing for others? So that's a high rhetorical statement, I know, but the subtitle of this entire session has been Design, Leadership in the Public Realm. You've heard about work in the public realm. You've heard about approaches to design. I'd like to ask our four presenters to reflect a bit on the role of leadership, not only the leadership roles that you're demonstrating, but the importance of leadership in moving cities and towns forward altogether in your experience. And I'm going to start with Trinity, who's worked so closely with mayors.
Is this working?
Yeah.
Sorry, what's the question?
The importance of leadership, and I think you already touched on it, but the importance of leadership beyond the leadership role that an architect or planner takes, but maybe it's a collaborative leadership that you've been working to inspire.
Yeah, I think, thanks for that, Peter. You know, the work that we do in particular is at the intersection of the kind of design and development, built environment, community, and local city leadership. And would just maybe reflect on the fact that those aren't also always seen as kind of natural bedfellows or natural partners, but the work that the design and development community does is very, very much the same as our kind of local electeds, right? It takes seeing the future, it takes courage, it takes vision, and it takes that ability to shepherd that. You know, I could, in my talk, I could have just as easily talked about how we engage our communities as our constituents, as our clients. But Peter, I think you alluded to it. For designers in the public or private sector, your clients are always bigger, your projects are always bigger than your client and who you're serving. That, we're sort of all working to serve a larger public good.
It's a great question, Peter. And I mean, as an architect, I feel so lucky, y'all, to be doing what I'm doing. And I'm 62 and I've been doing this for about 40 years. And I love what I do every day. I also grew up in a time when there weren't a ton of women architects around, and I don't want to bring gender into it, but it was something about being kind of an outsider, looking on the edges into something that you really, really wanted to be part of. I had some amazing mentors, incredible mentors, almost all men. And one of the things they imparted upon me was, as an architect, you're more than just drawing drawings or building buildings or providing a function or a service for people. There's an ethical dimension to what we do as architects that the very best of us take very, very seriously. And we know that it's not just about, hey, you've got a building, I can do this for you, let's go do that and make it happen. It's also seeing where those buildings and opportunities need to lie into the future, and being able to see that future and bring that to a community, to a client, to a city,
to a policy change with those frickin' codes, it's an incredible opportunity that is something that I think about every day, and how we bring clients into our small practice, how we don't bring certain clients into our small practice, the kinds of people I hire, the kinds of work I do as a mentor to other young architects in my world. And it's a larger dimension to what it means to be a professional in this firm, in this field as an architect. And I'm really grateful to be here every single day.
Great question. So I have now been in appointed positions in planning design. I've been an elected position as a former mayor and city councilor. But before all of that, I was a citizen of my community. And as I began to speak out using design or the built environment as a vehicle, people started calling me like a citizen architect, which I thought that's actually pretty good. I don't give up my role as a citizen when you become an architect. And so I think it's really key that we are citizens first, and then defined perhaps by our discipline. So my foray into the public sector started as the president of my neighborhood association. That was my way of giving something back, and bringing along with me the power of what it means when you represent more than yourself or more than your discipline. So I think of all of us as citizen attorneys, citizen accountants, citizen teachers. We don't give up our citizenship and the responsibility that comes with that as we try to forge change in the world.
No, it's a great question, and I'm not an architect. Don't tell anyone in this room, but I surround myself with them, right? And I think what I've learned in that process, and I've held a lot of posts, mostly appointed in government. I've worked for nonprofits, all kinds of things. And what I've learned is really the power of architecture in a conversation about policy is utterly transformative, because I can have those binders of all of the policies, and I can talk to you ad nauseum, perhaps, about what it takes to fill a pothole, which I've filled 676,000 of them. But when you can work with communities and figure out together that architectural object that is manifesting all of the things that we care about, we've been talking about, it's powerful. And it's not powerful because it's in the architect's hands. It's powerful when it leaves the room and communities themselves are pointing to that architecture, to that object, to that idea in a tangible way. And they're telling their neighbor about it. And they're telling you why it's important. You can't do that with a policy and a piece of paper. It's so fundamental to people's understanding of their built world. And so I think that whether you're in public service or not, there's power in that idea. There's a role for design to play, whether you are the citizen attorney or the citizen architect, that having those kinds of tools at the table can make all the difference in helping people to understand where their power is and what's possible.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question before we move to the audience and online, which is to ask each of our presenters to, again, quickly reflect on a challenge that you face perhaps endemically on a daily basis, or it's the mountain that's always there to be climbed. And in a sense, simply to identify the challenge might be enough as a way of perhaps provoking further thought amongst the audience. And I'll start with Maurice.
Wow, I get that one.
Well, not you alone, of course.
Yeah,
But.
no, I think the biggest challenge is to center something that I deeply love, like the power of design, to graft it onto the things that people care about. Because most people don't wake up in the morning and think about design and how much it matters. They think about their school system and how much it matters. They think about their neighborhood safety and how much it matters. And they think about the things that structure their lives. the only way that I could elevate those conversations and have a role to play if I want to talk about design is to make it matter to the things that people care about. And it's very challenging as a discipline to not simply talk about design because we want things to be more beautiful, but because we want them to solve problems and enrich people's lives. So it is a constant, challenge to get people to see how design can be a tool to realize the goals that they have for their community.
Susan?
That was pretty good, Maurice. I think what he said is really what I want to say. I talked for 6-7 minutes, maybe, Peter, about the challenge that I faced about how to, one of many, many, many people trying to change 20th century building construction. And so you don't need to have you talk anymore about that. I think what you said about beauty and design and having a bridge, we as a profession being a bridge to bring more beauty into people's lives and to help transform those lives. The projects that are most dear and closest to my heart are the ones that I would turn over and, 10 minutes later it was finished and there was hundreds of people in them just almost with tears in their eyes, just telling me how beautiful they were, telling themselves they didn't care about me. They were just experiencing the spaces that had been in my head and bringing them into the world. And that's not a challenge. That's just what I want to do every day. So thank you for sending that.
Trinity, could I ask you next?
Maurice's answer, echoing. No, Maurice's answer is something that that we think about and grapple with every single day. Would also say maybe to overuse a cliche, how we think globally and act locally, that the kind of existential challenges of yesterday are urgent today. We're having the third 100-year flood in the last few years, and how we use the power and the platforms that we have to address that, while also using the bully pulpit and tools that we have to act locally is it's a challenge.
Gia.
I thought Maurice was just going to list all the people in Chicago that are difficult to work with. Councilman this, alderman that, but no, that's very challenging too. So I could see his head go. No, but maybe I'll talk a little bit more specific, right? So when I ran transportation for Chicago, one of the big issues every day, if you looked at my Twitter feed, you'd know what it is. And it was about establishing a bike lane network, okay? And in some cities, that is an incredibly contentious thing because you're taking away roadway from maybe parking spaces and cars. You're changing the way people are used to, moving through the city. All of these things all come to the table. You'd be shocked about how much venom and conversation about bike lanes. And to the extent where we had, you'll know the alderman, we put in a bike lane after a lot of community process, and we think we're good, and we're rolling out the trucks, we're painting the bike lane, and the alderman comes out of his home and he's standing in front of my bike lane striping machine, stop, like he's ready to lay down in the street to stop paint for a bike lane that we had talked about, alderman. And, what was interesting is in establishing it, so one, we worked it out. Alderman, get out of the street. Okay, let's talk about this. And that can be challenging on its face, right? In that the thread of the conversation had been lost from when we had plenty of community process. But by the time we actually could get there to do the project, everybody forgot and went back to their old positions. And that can be hard. And, you look at a city and, ask any bike activists in Chicago, it's so obvious where you should draw the bike lanes. It's on a map. You can do it, right? But it's people's lives at that 1 foot level are much more complicated. And so we tried, what I learned in that, it was very hard, but we learned to ask a different set of questions, which was not where does the bike lane go, but it was where are the meaningful destinations in your life? Where are you trying to go? Going to church? Going to school? You going to a park? Okay, how would you like to get there? What are ways to get there? How can I create a meaningful network of opportunity and then draw your bike network that way. It was utterly transformative. And it took the argument away from me in a great way. I don't have to make the argument. Communities did, because I want to ride my bike with my kid to the park. It's just a basic quality of life idea, and we could operationalize it. And so I think the challenge that I found was, again, when you think you know what you're trying to do here, but it's really a different question you're trying to answer. But when you figure that out, you can get to a place that's better than it was when you started.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. I know we have some time. I've got a hand raised here and one there and then one there. So please, sir.
In cities, say around 100,000 people, and nationwide, there's a trend for fewer people to be homeowners. It's creating a bimodal community in a lot of instances. How can you use design to help mitigate that in, say, a city of 75 to 100,000 people?
Where the dominant goal is home ownership? Is that what you're saying? Where the dominant goal?
Right now, we're actually encouraging the middle class not to move elsewhere. When you're either rich or poor, in rental property or in very expensive property. How can design help us address that?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, I don't know about all of you, but before I was a homeowner, I was a renter. So at a certain point in my life, that was the option that I needed. And I think that all communities need to provide the full spectrum of options for residents. And my kids are still renters to this day. So it's very difficult for you to talk about not creating a place for your children and your grandchildren to live in your community. So I think that's one thing, but the point is always about fit. How do you fit these different housing options into a community that might be predominantly one type? And I just very quickly showed the Come Home Chicago initiative. Those were 2 and 3 flats. They weren't single family homes. They were row houses and townhouses, and they were specifically designed to fit into a single family neighborhood so that they still had the scale of a single family neighborhood. But that 2 flat means that the owner could occupy it and they could provide rental housing to someone else. Or a 3 flat could be owner occupied and they could have their in-law or a grandparent live in the same site on the same block. So I think it's about adjusting these typologies to the communities that you're trying to host them in. It's not high-rise construction. People talk about density, we need density. Well, there's a way to do density gently in a way that's responsive to the community that has to host it.
Okay, unless there's a,
That's great.
That was great.
okay,
Might just add missing middle. That's a term you used, and we use it a lot because there is a missing middle in so many of our communities. And it's missing middle housing, but it's also, there's an economic dimension to that. And a lot of us are looking at solutions that do try to provide the housing for 2 to 3 stories that are attached walls, but owned by a smaller group.
And I will add, affordable can be beautiful. And one of the things that we need to do is unlock the financing mechanisms that make it very hard to produce affordable housing that reflects the actual cost without trying to create a way to economically let it enter the marketplace. And where we see that have an effect is often on design. That's what gets pushed out in order to make the balance sheet work. And so I think that's work that we all have to do to think about how can you create a better envelope for affordability and great design at the same time without making that sacrifice.
thank you. There's a question here, sir, and then we'll come here.
My question is about density. I've been in Little Rock for 40 years. I've seen the city grow from 160,000 to 200,000 in 40 years. But I think it's obvious that global warming causes sea level rise, that you would have a migration of the tens of millions of people that might want to have to come to the central Arkansas. So I don't think that our suburban sprawl we could cover the central Arkansas 4 or 5 times over with suburban sprawl, and it wouldn't hold what we may need to hold in the next, say, 50 years or something.
So the question is,
I haven't talked too much about density. Wouldn't a dense city be more efficient with maybe people being able to live their lives without having a car as an option?
okay, all right.
I would expand that, a dense city that has accessible modes to get to the place where you want to be. Because I've seen cities that build high density, but you have to take a highway to get to the dense place. So I think the density juxtaposed to transit, and it doesn't always have to be rail-based transit, it could be express buses. And in Chicago, we actually changed the ordinance so that that quarter square mile that they draw around the transit station, you could draw a quarter square mile around a bus stop and have those relaxed requirements for parking. So I think density goes hand in hand with transit. If you don't have a transit first solution, then density is going to be a problem. And I know Arkansas is struggling with the idea that people should be able to live in this state without a car.
Well, and to part of your question, that we need to get prepared. I mean, the fact is, right, with climate, Chicago, I think, will win the climate Olympics. We have all the fresh water, so come on north. But I think it's a reality, right? You're seeing managed retreat happening in coastal cities. You're looking at kind of all this press and the kinds of investments we needed to make them probably 20 years ago, but now's the time. So investing in that transportation infrastructure, I hear there's a bipartisan infrastructure bill with a lot of money in it. This is the moment, right? And those kinds of funding, that kind of funding is linked to figuring out ways that we can transition our modes and figuring out how we transition to other sources of power. So I think that's the kind of work we need. It's like planting a tree. We should have done it 20 years ago. Infrastructure, we need to do that as well and get ready.
I'd also maybe just add a piece about reframing that conversation that Gia talked about earlier. I mean, we know that climate migration is already happening. When a hurricane hits Louisiana and people are permanently displaced, they're coming into Arkansas. So this move is already happening for a number of climate-based scenarios. But then when we reframe that conversation, what are those next immediate steps? What are those downtown cores that you want to support, and you need to support them by people living there? Do you want to increase that density around Argenta? I was in Russellville, downtown Russellville with my aunt last night with a really cute burgeoning downtown. And how do you actually support that retail, that quality of life, that thing that people bring, that you want to be in a place? You do it with people. People want to be around people. And so when you reframe that conversation and then you start to rezone it by right so that you're not revisiting a conversation 5 years later when everyone has forgotten what we've already agreed on.
Question here.
Well, I appreciate y'all being here, and I've got 6 of us here on the city board, so we got a majority.
How'd you
So if
pull
you have
that
an
off?
idea. But, and I agree with everything y'all have said, and we're just getting through, we'll have in the next month, a 9-month planning process for downtown. We need to implement what we have discovered from Sasaki and what you're talking about. Tell us how we rally our community, how we educate our community, and how we get buy-in to what we need to do downtown. Easy question.
Yeah, right. Well, Trinity has a lot of experience with mayors who have had to answer that question, so I know you have something you want to share. I would just say that you can only move at the speed of trust. And if the planning process that you've been through, I would argue that it has built some trust, and you need to capitalize on that and understand that you're along on this journey, but you got a whole lot of other people who have to be touched by the process in order to continue to allow you to move quickly. I would also argue that, you know, planning is by nature a long-term pursuit. So it is absolutely essential that you show progress in implementation on the things you said you would do. And so in any of these plans that Trinity talked about, there's the long term, there's the medium term, and there's the short term. The short term has to be tended to. So when I showed the pop courts, the brightly colored, that project was delivered in 3 months. 3 months, because it's just paint and AstroTurf. But it gave that community such an incredible sense of confidence that all this planning that we're doing can actually pay off. So one of the things we learned, and I think it was a lesson of COVID, is that we need to act quickly. We need to demonstrate what's possible, and then we get that many more people to come along with us for the midterm and for the long-term journey. That's how I'd answer it.
It's right on. You're doing great today. He's right on.
You're on fire, Maurice. I agree.
But it is, right? That gap between when you said something and when you did something, all the memories and that cooperation falls away. And as Maurice said, you know, things do move at the speed of trust, and the speed of trust is slow. And so I think that's right on. But in some of these instances too, it's also recognizing that community engagement's longitudinal, I like to say, that too often we're engaging with folks, here's the project, here's the thing we want to talk about, and we have this much time to talk about it, and we'll do meeting 1, 2, 3, 4, got it, plan done. But what we need to create are it's an architecture of engagement that you need to create, which is how do we have an ongoing conversation about the things that we care about? So you're not landing in a community saying, this is today what we're going to talk about. You're leaning actually into a set of relationships you've built over time. And that's that trust. There becomes a thickness to that trust. So you can come with new things and move faster. And I think that's the garden that needs watering in every city. How do you create scaffolding for people to be in a long-term conversation with each other? So then when the time comes, we're ready to go. It's like social capital, you know, Robert Putnam bowling alone, right? That we've lost some of our social ties and our ability to trust each other because we're not gathering. I'm interested in civic capital. How do you maintain that trust to do something together that is specific, that's not just responding in a crisis? And I think as cities, again, we sort of need to create these structures where we can have that conversation over time.
So just add maybe a little bit of bureaucratic technicalness to it, to Gia and Maurice's terrific answers. So just like, first of all, I'm assuming that you have had community meetings as you've gone along for Biagi. Like, you're not just handing people a plan and saying, do you buy into this? So nurturing those relationships that have been built through that communication. But you know, back to the example that I could have talked about for a really long time about the work that Boston's doing in this regard, about how you demonstrate that government is doing what they promised to do, and how you share that information publicly. You know, we were working with a mayor recently that realized, you know, they had a community center and a plan. They were actively working on the community center. It was breaking ground, and they had never updated their website. So on the website, it still says, you know, coming soon in 3 years. These are things that government's not necessarily good at. So how you're communicating back what that progress is. But then I would also just add a plug for, you guys are doing the council heavy lifting of getting a plan approved. But when you convene the civil servants on the ground who are implementing it, you know, checking in with, well, first of all, like, people who are waking up every day thinking about it, about implementing that plan, and then people who are also empowered to get things unstuck and find out why things aren't happening as things aren't happening, will go a long ways towards not just communicating the successes that you're having, but actually having those successes to communicate.
I can't add much to these esteemed planners on my left and my right because I'm an architect primarily, and I'm also only 24 hours in Little Rock. So what do I know? But maybe there's some wisdom in that in my experience yesterday. I woke up in my hotel in Marriott, and I walked over in the afternoon to the Arkansas Fine Arts Museum opening, and I walked down Main Street, and it was 0.8 miles of a walk. It was a good walk. It was about 83 degrees, hotter than it was in Seattle. But along the way, I discovered a lot of life on Main Street. I mean, I think you all should give yourself some credit for what you're also doing. You've got these nice little bioswales. They made me feel like, ooh, there's some design here. It's really fun. You're taking care of the flooding situation. You got a lot of fine grained along Main Street there. Got some big parking lots. That would be great to be able to fill those in. First things first, thank you. But those little wins, you know, the pop-up things. I mean, I came on the way back, I had a great tamale at a place that you probably know it many times. It's 1,000 square feet, super narrow on the street. I had a $3.99 tamale. It was awesome. Loved that group. I would have had two if I'd been hungrier. But it was a great little insight into what was going on in the neighborhood there. And, but I was looking for an ice cream shop. Simple thing, just little, but partnerships with local people who are good people who know how to make a great baked good that's maybe local to Arkansas, that is just a little bakery sitting right there, 1,000 square feet, a little tamale, a little ice cream shop, people partnerships, especially with a lot of younger people in this community who are probably in their 20s looking for like, what am I going to do with my life? Well, I'm going to make tamales, or I'm going to make the best croissant I can possibly make. And, my husband will come to a place like Little Rock. He says, well, where's the bakery? There's no bakery here. What kind of town is this? Where's no bakery? I'm not saying you don't have a bakery. I just didn't see it on Main Street. So
There's a good.
I got to find it.
All
right, awesome. Thank you.
Can I add one quick little piece? A reminder of what Maurice said about downtown being the heart of the city, but neighborhoods being the soul of the city. And we've seen with mayors that we work with, if there is a focus on downtown at the exclusion of neighborhoods, that people get really upset about that. So I think a joint narrative of we are improving the heart of our city and also celebrating neighborhoods that are successes that are happening in neighborhoods are critical to keeping your momentum going.
Very, very good point to underscore. It's both and. Yep. We can do both at the same time. And we are suffering because we thought if we just took care of the heart of our city, everything else will follow. And it didn't. And so mayors and city councilors are looking to give neighborhoods equal time. And you can test ideas downtown and then translate them to neighborhoods in a lot faster than it takes to kind of resuscitate a downtown. So if there's anything, and I suspect we're preaching to the choir here, if there's anything that's the heart and soul of your city simultaneously.
I have been signaled it might be time to draw at least this open discussion to a close. I'm going to thank our presenters and ask for a round of applause for them, please. I'm going to thank Dean DeSoto and her staff for all of their contributions and assistance today. Stephanie Street and the fantastic staff here at the Clinton Presidential Center. Back at home, at least for me in Fayetteville, we have a superb staff and faculty and incredible students. I will just say that the university in Fayetteville is at the service of the entire state in terms of what we want to do and are capable of doing. I'm joined here with Steve Luoni, who's our director of the University of Arkansas Community Design Center, and elsewhere on our faculty. We are working in Pine Bluff, in Sheridan, in Hot Springs, in Fayetteville. We've worked in Wilson. We're working in El Dorado. We've worked in Texarkana, in affordable housing, in community design, in preservation design. We are here as a school for the entire state of Arkansas, and we look forward to further conversations with all of you. We'll welcome a commentary upon this event because, as I said at the beginning, this is just the first of a series connecting design to leadership to public service to the public good. I'm very grateful to all of you for attending. To those online, thank you for your time as well. Have I left anything out? Dean DeSoto? Gavin, we're okay? Well, please safe home everyone, or to the rest of your workday. Thank you very much for joining us today.